Alright, welcome back. This time I want to try to cover chapters 12 through 17. The book just kept going and I just kept reading. So right off the bat, we meet Patience, and she's anything but patient. She's very impetuous and she comes off kind of hostile at first, especially to Fitz. She really wants him to be trained in the arts and she feels like they're doing him a disservice by having not done that. So she makes it her duty to, get him trained up in the arts. And one of the consequences of that is that he ends up getting a dog named Smithy. And, he paints the picture and everything. It seems like everybody in the castle kind of has opinions about her. And Che also has some kind of hates on her a little bit, basically saying that she doesn't connect thoughts very well. She's kind of disorganized and rambling, somewhat just overall unintelligent. She also takes up this strange habit of referring to him as Thomas. Not sure what that's about. And later on, Fitz comes to view her, I think, as very creative and industrious. And the sense that I get about her just from what I've read is anything but unintelligent. So it's interesting to hear their opinions on her. And there's one conversation that Fitz has with a fool where it seems like the fool most vocally empathizes with Patience, but he kind of leaves it up to Fitz to decide how to go about dealing with that character. Also in that conversation, we learned that there was an unknown they who contributed to Chivalry's death. So a whole lot was going on in these 6 chapters, one of the most significant of which is Fitz is soon going to be learning skill. And, before he does this, he kind of has a sit down with Burrick. And Burrick warns him about Galen and Galen's cruelty, especially to people who have wit. Basically tells him this story that, Galen murdered this girl because she could communicate with hawks. Burrick knows for certain that Fitz uses wit and he communicates with dogs. He's worried that Galen will find this out. And we see some of Burrick's personality come out in this conversation as well, because Burrick basically says, and if you do these things, if you do engage in wit and you do communicate with dogs, I would sooner rather see you forged. But I think that's a lot of all bluster. I don't know if he's serious about that, because it actually seems like he's very horrified that Galen has killed this girl who used wit. And one other interesting point that came up in this conversation was that when Burrick and Fitz are talking, Burrick basically says he's worried that Galen will be able to find things in Fitz's mind that Fitz, has maybe tried to hide from him or is just keeping quiet about. And he basically says, Chivalry used to do this with me. He used to be able to cause buried emotions and thoughts to well up inside of me. As he says this, he blushes and then tears up. So I don't know what that was about. Fitz is going to be trained in skill and Galen's going to be the instructor, but we learn a lot more about the magic that skill is and what's involved in it. But also there's so many strange social rules and rules of etiquette and moralizing that surround skill. Galen, the instructor, is very austere, he's very Spartan-like, and we notice very quickly that he just spurns women. And he excludes them from the first 2 days. He acts like they're not even there. So he's got this kind of exclusionary sexism going on. And then even when he's discussing history, he excludes queens and, princesses from the history as if they're just not present. But I think more than anything, he's just cruel. He's condescending. He's harshly judgmental to everybody. And he's most cruel to Fitz. But skill itself is this quasi-mystical ability. And those who have the right aptitude have the ability to communicate and sort of liaison with the elderlings. And I kind of wondered here, does skill kind of more innate to the elderlings? So as they're all these students are training to learn the skill, there's so much shame and disgust and humiliation that keeps them in line, that keeps them learning skill in the way that Galen believes that it should be taught. And I guess in some sense, the way this kingdom believes that it should be taught. But there's also weirder stuff in there. Once again, he doesn't want like the sexes conversing, and he doesn't even want Fitz feeding his dog. So he's just an odd, cruel, controlling dude. So there's this wild scene where as they're learning skill, Galen suddenly challenges Fitz. Fitz, in the moment, believes like, oh, I'm more powerful than him. I could push back and I could kind of do what I want, impose my will. And I wasn't really sure what was happening, to be honest. More importantly, he sort of missteps. And when he missteps, he loses control of the willpower, and he sort of is just swept up in this rush of euphoria. And then at that point, he just doesn't even care what Galen's doing. And Galen is beating the hell out of him, and he's just like, that's fine, I'm happy. And Fitz feels it too. He's like so ashamed. So he starts like crawling to the edge, and I couldn't tell, like, was he still lost in that euphoric sense? And the one thing that saves him here is this really debased ability of wit. So he communicates with the dog, Smithy, and that gives him just enough spark to continue. But no one seems to care when they use it to communicate for, military purposes. But yeah, overall, skill seems somewhat blurry to me. Burek is raging after this, and he beats the hell out of Galen, right? He kind of returns the beating. But before he does this, interestingly, he makes sure Fitz wasn't engaged in any wit. Like, he makes sure that that's not the reason for the beating. It's hard to know if he thought the beating was justified had he engaged in wit and Galen caught him. But how did the king not step in here? As he's recovering, I feel like we get this sort of reaction from Fitz, where he starts kind of critiquing this society that he's in. And some of it starts with Galen and Regal, right? So he's having this conversation with Molly, and he basically accuses Regal of just, wanting a woman who's, physically beautiful. And then he kind of has a critique on this that is sort of along the lines of, well, beauty can be defined as broader than just skin deep, right? And he has examples to disprove that. He talks about Patience. He talks about Molly herself. He also talks about Hodd. And it also seems to have been a reaction against, the way Galen was teaching this, right? He kind of excluded the women at first. He excluded them from history. But even more than that, he doesn't seem to think that there's a good reason, right, to have been cruel at all. So he was reacting against all of this teaching. One of the lessons that he picked up and that had been inculcated in him from Galen was that this kind of judgmental attitude, this critical attitude towards maybe like lower classes. Because another kind of reaction he has is when he hears the guards talking about politics, and he realizes they're doing this very competently and astutely. That contrasts with thinking of them as dolts, like Galen had kind of insinuated. So yeah, it seemed like there was this sense where he was kind of reacting against the repressive nature of this kingdom. And it also made me wonder, like, is that the same way chivalry saw this kingdom? Is that why he took Patience? Because it seems like no one has any understanding of why chivalry picked Patience, even when they met her. But yeah, we see Fitz want to react with Molly on a more thoughtful level. And he sort of quests out with his skill, but it's kind of a barrier. He's unable to do that. And he has this realization, what if I'm always going to be at this level of a disconnect with, her thoughts, right? In the same way that there's a disconnect that he can see and perceive between Molly and Smithy, the dog. So something about her not being receptive to the skill, like, leaves kind of this absence of intimacy for Fitz. And it also kind of made this skill seem the way Fitz uses it as almost like an introvert. So he kind of quests out in this more taciturn nature. He doesn't go around and boldly express how he feels. He uses the skill to do it kind of quietly, and that's how he think he wants to form intimacy. And I'm starting to realize that maybe the reason he communicates so much with dogs is because they communicate right back with him. And it just seemed to add another reason why maybe Fitz is lonely. Weirdly though, I got the sense that Burrick and Chivalry might have understood each other in a deeper way. And then we get to chapter 17, and it is crazy. Why the hell did they let Galen orchestrate this trial? Bastards. All of them. So this trial, they take Fitz out beyond Forge. It's obviously done on purpose. And then they leave him without a horse. I mean, they're trying to get him killed. There's just no other explanation for this. And I couldn't help but wonder, like, this has got to be the same unnamed they who the Fool reference had a hand in and were complicit in Chivalry's murder. And I can't help but feel that this was Galen. But yeah, this was a tense, kind of action-packed chapter. I really liked it. It really kind of sped up the story once again. But enough of that. There was a whole lot in these 6 chapters, and most of it was I wanted to try to make sense of skill and what that meant and what all the boundaries were and what all this moralizing was about. And it's very interesting. There are a lot of different uses through the different characters where they exhibit skill kind of in their own way, and they have their own meaning attached to it. So it's a very complicated thing to assess. But either way, I liked all of these chapters. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.